Welcome to Something Positive for Positive People. I'm Courtney Brain. Something Positive for Positive People is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides therapy for people who are struggling with the herpes stigma. Um, Today's guest is Meg, and you're in what part of Canada?
I'm in Hamilton, Ontario.
Man Hamilton, Ontario, or Mid Hamilton?
Ha- nope, just Hamilton.
Oh, yeah, I messed that up. Yeah, you gave me a whole lesson on Canada's geography yesterday, and I was like, "Oh, I only
Yeah,
know five places." I thought that I was naming cities. I'm naming provinces, and I was like, "Oh,
provinces.
what's a province?" So I appreciate the lesson from you. Um,
Oh, my pleasure.
you also prayed for me yesterday. That was nice. I'm
Yeah.
sick, not
Aw.
sure what it is. You can hear it in my voice, but I'm really just experiencing body aches right now, and I'm kind of cold. I'm on like day 5 of whatever this is. I'm getting a COVID test. I thought it would be here today, but I guess it'll be tomorrow. So I won't know if that's what it is until it's probably over with. So sucks for me, but um, I'm glad that we were able to connect. You said that you found me through the this podcast will kill you episode that
Yeah.
they did on herpes, and I'm glad they let me talk for as long as they let me because I had a lot to say about my story, and I'm glad that you and I were able to connect. So when you and I spoke yesterday, uh, I got the main thing that I wanted to touch on with you is that you said that you did some traveling and speaking after your diagnosis, and you had done
Yeah.
it for how long? How many years did you say you did it?
5.5 years.
So for 5.5 years, you did this traveling and speaking about STIs and herpes with your church group, and
Well,
you. Oh,
yeah, it was actually with a nonprofit.
oh, okay. I was
Yeah.
like, whoa, how did that work?
Yeah. No.
Okay.
It was with a youth empowerment organization.
Okay. So with the youth
Yeah.
empowerment organization, you did this speaking for as long as you did,
Yeah.
and you realized that you were compounding your trauma because you hadn't dealt with it. Um,
Yeah.
can you tell me more about that? Like, let's start with that, and then we'll just go from there. Like, I'm curious to know because a lot of people, myself included, um, I've been HSV positive for a little over 8 years now. And
Hmm.
5 years into my diagnosis was when I began to discover that there were online communities and support groups. And I started to become active in those. And that's when I began the podcast. And in doing so, like, yeah, this is extreme, but I did what I was doing just for the people who were talking about wanting to end their lives, who wanted to
Yeah.
commit suicide as a result of their diagnosis. And I don't mean to say commit suicide. I think there's another way of saying it that escapes
Yeah.
me
You
right
can say
now.
take their own life
Take their own
or
lives. Yeah,
die by suicide.
die by suicide. That's what it is.
Hmm.
And I, as I learned more about this, I've figured that I'm a survivor of suicide because there have been people in proximity, not like super duper close, who have taken their own lives, and people have said um, it's not threats, but have contemplated or had
Like.
suicide ideation
Yeah. Uh
around
huh.
me. And so this was something that I didn't realize at the time had hit so close to home. This was something that I learned over time, understanding trauma and our trauma responses to things. And
Hmm.
it was until recently that I began to see, oh, that's really what the connection is. Like, this isn't really, to me, it's not about herpes. It's more so about the passion that I have and the connection that I have to suicide in itself. So,
Hmm.
with that understanding now, I can honestly say that I jumped into this HSV advocacy before I was ready to do so. So, when you were having the conversation with me yesterday, um, I felt that, and I see it
Hmm.
from other people who may jump online and start social media pages, who may start podcasts, who may start blogs, and get into this before they really know what they're getting themselves into, and become such a reliable source of support for people who are at a much worse space than perhaps they are, and they just may not be equipped with the emotional capacity to handle this. So, um, I want to
Yeah.
know, what was your traveling and speaking about STIs like, Just start there. Talk about the experience of traveling and speaking, and then we'll go into when you realize that the trauma was compounding.
Yeah. So, probably the first year, I was just running off of adrenaline, so I didn't notice. I didn't think about it. I was actually dating somebody, like, my husband. I met my husband on tour, and he was the drummer of the band that I toured with. The whole thing was like there was a band that played, and there were videos, and there were public speakers. So I was a public speaker, and he was in the band. And I would tell my story, and I would walk in front of him on stage and tell this story about how I like slept around with a bunch of guys for like my self worth, and then I got this diagnosis and this sad moment, and then I realized that my value, like my what is it like,
Self worth.
my mistakes are not, yeah, they don't like, they don't devalue me. Like, mistakes are important to make, and we can learn from them, and blah 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 blah, and how like your self-worth is not attached to the mistakes you make, like you're not a sum of all your mistakes. And how like one line that I used to say is, you're valuable just because you're here, and you've done nothing to gain or earn your values. There's nothing you can do to lose it.
Wow.
And yeah, but then like I'm up there talking and saying this, and like feeling devalued. So it started to wear me down. I started having like physical illness. So I didn't know this at the time, but like trauma can sometimes manifest in like, body pain, migraine headaches, aches and pains in your legs, um, like lethargy, just being so, so, so tired. There's just a lot that is linked with trauma, like physical, like somatic things that manifest in your body based on trauma you felt, like in your emotions and your heart. So it was crazy, and I didn't know at the time, but it slowly started wearing me down. I got really, really depressed. Um, Kids would like, because I'm in high schools, right? And I'm like, I was diagnosed with herpes simplex too. And then there'd be like a kid who'd be like, ew, gross. And like, ugh,
You
like
can't be
that
ready for
hurt.
that.
What?
You can never really be ready for that.
No, and no matter how many times, I mean, I think I spoke to over 500,000 kids. Like, maybe 300,000. I might be exaggerating. 300,000, I think. We did the math one time. I think it was 300,000. But whatever. Like, a lot. I've spoken to a lot of kids, and it happened a lot. Like, I've been called a slut. I've been told I'm disgusting. Someone one time was like, "Oh, what did they say?" Oh, it doesn't matter. I don't even need to relive it. It's just like, it was just heckling. I got heckled a lot, and then I would like try to get back at them. So I would do this little exercise. this is really this is mean. But what I would do is I would like, so there's a statistic that in Canada, and I don't know what the statistic is in the U.S., but in Canada it's 1 in 5. So 1 in 5 people, or at the time that was like 10 years ago, so it might be even higher now. But one in 5 people has herpes. So I'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4 herpes, and I'd like point to the person who heckled me. It's like such a cheeky, sarcastic, mean thing to do, but like I'm supposed to be the adult, and this is like a teenager in the crowd, and I'm like herpes. Anyway, so just like every single day, up to 3 times a day, I'm telling this story, and I'm getting heckled, and I'm reliving. So a really good motivational speaker, or a really good public speaker, will connect to the emotions that they felt in the story that they're telling. They'll like reconnect with those emotions. And so every time I would reconnect with emotions of receiving my diagnosis, of having to tell people, I had to tell my ex-boyfriend, like, hey, I have a positive diagnosis for herpes, like, you should get tested. And he was like, you didn't get it from me. And I was like, I didn't say I got it from you, but I am saying that I have it. And we reason that you might have it too. And he like threatened to pull me out of my house by my hair, beat me up on my front lawn. Like, I would relive those things every time I talked about it. So I'm causing myself secondary trauma and like re-traumatizing myself every day. You know,
For
every
six
day.
and a half years.
For no, 5.5. But
Oh, for
yeah,
five and a
yeah,
half
about
years.
5 years. Yeah, and you know, it wasn't 365, but it was 8 months out of every year, and it was usually 5 days a week, and sometimes it was up to 3 times a day. I was telling this story from a stage, and you know, having to like protect myself and create like a barrier between me and the judgment. You know, you can feel judgment in a room. You can feel when people start to think differently about you. You know, you walked out on stage the first time and they didn't think that's what you were going to say, and then suddenly they're like, "Oh, she's not who I thought she was." And like that judgment came from kids that I spoke to, but also from like my own friends and my own community groups, you know, like the places where I found home. I was being judged in those places too. And so it's like, you know, it's I don't know if it's the correct term, but it is like secondary trauma. It's like you've got your original trauma, and then you compound it every time. You know, every time you tell somebody, and their reaction is like not welcoming.
Yeah.
Every time, yeah, you share, and someone is like, you know, oh, you're not who I thought you were.
You know, what I'm finding in your story, it seems like you were alone. And I know that a lot of the people who come to the herpes advocacy, activism space, whatever we want to call it, they
Mm-hmm.
are almost encouraged to or inspired to because someone else has been there. And it just kind of has this continued ripple effect of, oh, I see someone who is openly talking about herpes. I love their confidence. I love their page. I love their color scheme. I love what they're doing. I can do it too. And it seems like you didn't have anyone to look to for that, nor did
Mm-hmm.
anyone look to you for that. So this is a very unique situation because you're left on your own to learn this, go through it, figure it out. There's
Yeah.
no blueprint in front of you of how you're going to navigate this. And how long ago was this? When did you stop? How many years ago?
I stopped touring in 2011, I think.
Okay. Okay, so
Yeah,
2011.
2011.
Yeah, and from what I understand, the space, especially on Instagram, wasn't near as active as it is. Like people weren't near as visible who are living with HSV as they are
Yeah.
now in 2020. And so
Mm-hmm.
for you having to navigate all of this alone, like that in itself, the isolation is traumatizing. The
Absolutely.
reinforcement is traumatizing, and then the way that you didn't have support. You just flat out had very few. Let me rephrase that because you did mention your pastor. You mentioned having spoken to your friend who was initially a poor source of support for you, but
Yeah, she
became
got better.
but got better. Yeah. So how is that? How was
Well,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, I think the way that I coped with it is that I didn't expect anybody to support me. And I think the reason I didn't expect anyone to be there for me, so anyone who did was like a bonus, was because I just felt like Christians don't have STIs. Like Christians don't have sex before marriage, so therefore no one can have, you know, a sexually transmitted infection or disease. And I mean, that's so wrong. It's like very errant thinking. Um, but it was like, it's how I felt. So, you know, it wasn't a mystery that I was going to talk about this. Like lots of my friends knew that I was going to talk about, you know, herpes on a
Mm.
stage in front of hundreds of teenagers. Um, but I did feel really alone. I was the only person I knew. I was the only person who had a positive diagnosis.
Now, there. are some people who may argue that the more you talk about it, the easier it gets, the more therapeutic and healing it is. That wasn't your experience.
No. And I think that to those people, I would say, um, talking about something to someone who's a good listener is great, but that's not therapy. That's not like a that's not a plan to heal you. That's a sounding board. That's a place to just be yourself and say a thing, and hopefully that person is receptive and welcoming and is not going to pile any judgment on you, is not going to re-stigmatize you or like stigmatize you or re-traumatize you. But talking to friends and talking about it, um, maybe at first it feels good to say it over and over and to get used to it, like roll it around in your mouth a little bit, get used to the sound of those words, get used to the shape of someone's face when when you tell them, and you get used to it and whatever. But I didn't just talk to lots of people. Like I talked to hundreds of people at one time. And so like that didn't get any easier. That got well, that's not true. I think what got easier is I learned how to turn off my humanity. I just would be like, blah, blah, blah. I have herpes. You have value. Like, I'm waving by. Like my compassion for them as human beings went in the toilet because I was just like, you don't care about me. I don't care about you. I'm here to tell you a story, and I hope you listen. Like, I got really jaded and really sharp. I wasn't a welcoming space by the end.
That makes
and
sense.
like, yeah, like I get why people think like talking about it becomes easier, sure, but I think therapy and counseling is like a plan for your healing. Talking about it with friends is confessional, and that's good. That, like, when you have an infected sore, this is gonna sound really gross, hopefully no one's queasy, but you have like an infected sore, and then you you get that sore. Um, we My sister calls it letting. I don't know, letting a wound. You like let the pus out, and then that sore can heal. And like confession is like letting, and that's fine. It's good. There's a place for it. But counseling and therapy is to heal you. It's to um, get at why you were in the position that you were in, um, that caused like not like you might not even herpes is not maybe the worst thing that's ever happened to you, right? Like herpes might be just like the cherry on top of like a pile of shitty things that have happened to you. And in my case, the reason that I felt like I needed therapy at the end, I mean, I should have been in therapy the moment that I found out. Like the doctor should be like, you have a positive diagnosis. Here's a business card to a therapist. Like they should go together. It should just be like immediate. But I felt like I'm ready to be in therapy now because I know that herpes is not what needs to get healed. Right? What needs to get healed is the fact that I don't believe that I'm a valuable person. And
And
so I
herpes
run
just
around trying to catch my value from other people and places.
and your herpes diagnosis just reinforced that messaging that was already there.
That's right, yeah. And
Now,
every time you tell another person, they reinforce that message for you too.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
your it's interesting to me that we're talking here about seeing a therapist and going to therapy and how that plays a role in the healing process. You're someone who is you're Pentecostal. What what
Well,
what
I
do we
wouldn't say
want?
I'm Pentecostal, but
What?
I did
Yeah, I
go to
was
a
gonna.
Pentecostal church.
I didn't want to butcher that, but I ended up doing it anyway. You're a Christian.
Yeah, I'm a Christ follower,
Okay.
Christian, yes, sure.
So in religion, we talk about confessions, we talk about prayer, we talk about um, confessing your sins, right? And what you're describing, we're talking about the usefulness of therapy, and I think that it's interesting that you're not saying, "Oh, just talk to your pastor so they can heal you."
No, 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 no. no, no. You're a pastor, and like, I can't broad stroke every pastor, but your pastor went to school to learn the Bible and to learn how to read in Greek and Hebrew, probably. And they took one class on, like, I don't know 100%, but what I understand is they took a class on basically like triage. Like, a family falls apart, a pastor can offer 6 weeks of counseling, and after 6 weeks, they're supposed to refer you to a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist.
I didn't know about that second part.
Well, and I don't think many pastors do it. And I can't speak to that. Like, I'm not a pastor. And my own pastor absolutely refers people. He is like the first one to say, I'm so sorry that you're going through this. Let me hear you. I'm here to listen. And here's the name of a therapist who can help.
Mm.
He's like the first to say it. And like, I respect him so much. He's like a really young guy. He doesn't have the experience, and he's just like the first to admit it, you know? He's just like, I can't help you, but I know someone who can, and so let me hook you up with that person.
And being able to admit that is really powerful and healing in itself. I'll be the first
Yeah.
to tell people, like, people come to me for answers. I would say over the course of the last 3 years, we're in the thousands of people who I've somehow had contact with about their diagnosis and like just looking for something. They're looking for
Yeah.
something that I can give them, but I'm not comfortable with giving them. And it's some form of like validation, escape, or approval to be able to do something that they know damn well they ain't got no business doing, like not disclosing or not going to the
Right.
doctor and get tested. And in one of our podcast episodes, I interviewed the widow of a man who he had a spider bite that wouldn't heal, and he never went and I don't think he, if I remember the story correctly, because this was one of the very first episodes of the podcast that I recorded, but she, long story short, found out that he had HIV. And after going through his journals after he passed away, she found out that the only person he told was their pastor. And the pastor's advice was pray. Uh, yeah, it was pray,
I'm like so angry. I'm
and
so
it
mad.
wasn't to go to the doctor. Like this this was the advice given, and this is a very, what do we want to call it, like high profile, a very trustworthy source of information, where if the pastor would have just said, hey man, go get treatment, go to the doctor, like not ignore it,
Yeah.
act like it isn't there. He went on to live for a while after having told his pastor, but it was a spider bite that couldn't heal that ultimately ended up taking his life because of this kind of advice. And I think that when people aren't in the position to be able to give advice or give guidance or help people, they need to, at the very least, acknowledge that.
Just admit it.
That's
Just
it.
admit it.
I'll listen.
Just say,
I'll listen to anybody. Like I'll hear
yeah,
you. I'll listen to you. I'll,
yeah.
but I'm not gonna give you information that is going to do further harm to yourself or other
That's it.
people. And it's
Yeah,
more so
yeah.
about, doing the right thing for yourself. I had a conversation with someone actually earlier today who, they asked a lot of questions, and I had to just stop them and be like, hey, listen, you're asking a lot of me that's outside of my range of perspective. Listen, if you're positive for herpes or negative for herpes, here's what the next steps are. If you're
Yeah.
positive, like now you have this diagnosis, you have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of your partners that you may be putting at risk. And don't think so far into the future trying to plan for every scenario that might come up, because it
Oh,
may
because,
not.
oh my gosh.
It may not.
Yeah, and also, you just ruin yourself by doing that. Like, I got married, right? And we did not have sex without a condom for like 6 years. Dude, every time. Like, because I was so worried because he's not HSV positive. You know, I am. And so I was so worried about giving it to him. And yeah, I forget where I was going with this, but like, oh, because we were like, we're always going to wear a condom, so we'll never have kids, right?
How old are you? Oh wait, how old are your two kids?
Yeah, my son is turning 8, and my other son, I have two little boys. One is turning 8, one's turning 4, so they're 7 and 3.
So you enjoy doing this so much, you didn't do it twice, at least.
We at least did it 2 times. Yeah, like I was so afraid, and eventually it took him just being like, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. And so if I'm not afraid, then you don't need to protect me all the time. And like we use condoms still, like especially if I'm feeling like, oh, I feel just a little bit off, like I think probably we should this time. Um, and I don't want any more babies, so also that. But yeah, like you'll drive yourself crazy just being like, because I was like, okay, now I have herpes. I'm never gonna have kids, so now we have to talk about adoption. So like before we even got married, I was like, are you okay with adoption? Like we didn't have to pull that emotional luggage around,
And
you know?
can I ask you something?
Yeah.
So your decision to adopt uh, rather than produce children on your own was solely based on the fact that you had herpes?
Yeah. Because I was reading and I was like, okay, well, first of all, I don't want to give it to my husband. And then I was like, look at all the birth defects. Oh my God. I was like, I could never have a baby. I just thought, like, why would I subject my child to this? Like, there's no way. So I made a decision without all the information. And then, like, pulled this emotional luggage around with me, constantly being like, I can't have my own kids. And like, it just didn't have to happen. I could have just went to the doctor, had a conversation, been like, tell me more about having kids with herpes. Like, how do you do it? What are the limitations? What do I need to do? And she would have said, hey, lots of people with herpes have babies. For 2,000 years, people have been having babies with herpes, and the kids are fine. Sometimes the kids are not fine. And those are such rare cases that we decided that every mother who is pregnant who has a positive herpes diagnosis will be given antibiotics before delivering.
Yeah.
And that's the solution. Like, come on.
I want to
I didn't have to sweat.
I want to make sure to note this that we're not talking about having kids with herpes. Like
No, no, no.
herpes is the
The
other
kids don't
parent.
have herpes.
We're not talking about like herpes being the other parent here. We're talking about having
Yes. Oh my God.
reproducing while HSV is present in
Present.
our bodies.
That is correct.
Yeah. Uh,
Well, and also, can I just point out that this is something that a man with a positive HSV diagnosis does not need to worry about. This is solely a burden on the women who are HSV positive.
And that's another, I think that brings up another point as well, because a lot of the responsibilities uh, are not on us as men, people with penises, because
Right, people with penises.
we don't have to worry about, harm being done to the reproductive system or to the, the,
If you have a penis, you're not passing a child through it.
yeah. Oh, thank God.
Yeah, yeah, blessed,
uh,
blessed. Yeah,
that'd be,
it is a burden that people with vulvas we have to carry. So it's a very it's a dynamic of this that not everybody has to deal with.
Yeah, and that on a broader perspective, or from a broader perspective too, it stems to it goes back to not even the conception process, but like the conversations around STIs. Like you have to be more on top of things than we do because we're just not. We don't have to be. There's so
Yeah,
much more complexities around women's reproductive health than there is around men. For
yeah,
us, like we don't go to the doctor regularly. Oftentimes, when I speak to men, the conversation around STIs often doesn't even happen because we're programmed to, all right, well, wear a condom, we're fine. Or even the information that
right.
we get from medical professionals. If we are positive for HSV, it's often wear a condom, you'll be fine. If you don't have an outbreak, then you can have sex. You don't have to tell your partners. And this type of
Oh my gosh.
information is just what's circulating around the health space, and this is what
Well, and
people are
that's,
being given.
yeah, and that's exactly how this thing is so prolific because, you can be shedding the virus at any point in time. You
Hmm.
don't have to have an outbreak to be infectious.
Yes, and that's
And
what.
that's also a part of the stigma, right?
Yeah,
Because you're
people.
like, I could infect you at any time.
Hmm. People got to
Yeah,
understand that. People got to understand that there is, in fact, always a risk. There are things that we can do to minimize or reduce the risks, but
yeah,
we tend to prioritize our partner's needs over our own. So, for instance, I don't take any medication until I have an outbreak or if I feel something is happening. And I haven't had an outbreak. I had my first one, and then I think I had one more around the time that I got
oh
fired
my
from a
goodness.
job, right?
Oh,
So
bless you.
this is over the last 8 years. So
Oh my gosh, that's so amazing.
regardless if I had partners who were positive or negative, I would inform them, hey, listen, there's
Yeah,
always going to be a risk whether I take this medication or not. So whether it
yeah.
reduces it or it doesn't, I don't like that's not that I don't feel comfortable with taking the medication. And there was a period of time where I would just like take it before I was going to hook up with someone, thinking that this was
That
gonna,
would,
yeah, like that's a common thing as well, thinking that this was gonna
yeah.
reduce the risk. But um, it once the reality hit for me that there was always a risk, there was always a possibility, there was always a chance of passing it on. I think that was really liberating for me, and I think that if we collectively, as a people, as people who are living with HSV, if we
Yeah.
recognize our bodies and make the decisions for us, because a lot of times people will get on daily suppressive therapy and then
Yeah.
start getting outbreaks, right? So
Yeah, well,
you're
and it does, like,
doing
depending
that.
on the kind,
Yeah.
it can really mess with, like, other systems.
Yes, and not just that, but it's even triggering psychologically.
Yeah.
One of my past partners, she mentioned that taking the medication every day, it just gave her anxiety because it was a constant
Because
reminder in her
it's a
face.
reminder. Yeah.
It's a constant reminder that you have this virus and
Yeah.
you have to take this medication in order to be a little bit more normal, right? And
Hmm.
another friend of mine, once he found out he had herpes, he was like, "Nope, I'm getting on the medication." Never had an outbreak before. So as he starts taking the medication, starts getting outbreaks. So I think that collectively, if we can prioritize our own bodies and be able to sit with it and see what it is we have going on over time, this is going to reduce the medication that's being sold and paid for to where we need better options. We need better treatment options. So for the
Well,
people who
that's the
have
thing. Like,
excruciating pain or often have outbreaks, like that, obviously that's the exception here. But for those of us who are able to manage or who are making decisions solely based on, okay, I want to just lower the risk of passing this on to my partner so that they feel comfortable, I think that
mhm.
we have a lot more power than we give ourselves credit for here as far as creating change.
Yeah. I think, too, like, it would be great if someone could just come up with a better treatment option. Like, if so many people have it and it's been around for so long, you think that there'd be better treatment options.
That's what I would think.
You
Yep.
know? Come on, like, someone make a vaccine for this, for the love of God. Like, nobody should have to go through this. Like, how old does a virus have to be before it gets a vaccine? Like, I think that everyone should listen to that podcast episode of This Podcast Will Kill You. Like, the Aarons talk about how, like, this virus is so old. It came with us when we, like, you know, when we were, like, still hanging out with monkeys all the time.
And that's the thing. Like a more accurate statement might be that herpes have humans.
Yeah. Yes. Herpes have humans. They found hosts and they were like, this works real good. Let's keep going. Like, come on. It's so common. Like, as if there's not a better option than, like, oral antivirals that barely touch it
Yeah.
or cause other problems in your body. Like, it's dumb.
Yeah. Jumping back into the time frame that you were speaking, you were touring,
Sure.
and you were talking about
Mm-hmm.
your um, your status and talking to high school students. What was the purpose? Was the purpose like part of a sex ed program that encouraged abstinence, or was it something else? Because that's all I can think of it possibly being.
Yeah. So it actually was in along the lines of like empowerment. So like I wanted to communicate to kids that I wanted them to have the power to say yes or the power to say no, and I didn't want it to be dependent on what they believed about themselves.
Okay.
Like if you believe that you're, less than dirt, then you're going to say yes to whoever shows you any kind of attention, and you're going to say yes to whatever they want, whether it's sex or whether it's carrying their books or whether it's doing their homework. Like you you interact with the world differently when you believe something about yourself. How you interact with the world, how you interact with people changes. And my message, more than anything, was one about self-worth and just realizing that you are a valuable person because your heart beats within your chest, because you woke up this morning, because your lungs fill with air. Like you have value because you're here. And that whole idea that like, you know, I, yeah, we've talked about this before a little bit, but like this one liner that I just, really, I said it every time was that like, you are valuable and you didn't do anything to earn that value, which means you can't do anything to lose it. So even though I have an STI, I'm still a valuable person. But the funniest thing is that from the stage, I'm saying that to kids, being like, I'm valuable and you are too. But, going home, I'm like, I'm the worst. Like, what am I doing? Like completely hypocritical. Like I couldn't carry the truth of my message out into my own life. I could really only say you're valuable, but I couldn't attach it to myself in a true way or in a like a
Mm-hmm.
steadfast way.
Um, it's interesting that you also mentioned how the way that I heard it is you experience compassion fatigue from all of the heckling, from all of the meanness of
Yeah,
the kids, and you
yeah,
created essentially this, or maybe it wasn't created, but it just kind of showed up this persona. Because my therapist and I have talked about this robot version of myself. It's very not emotional. It's very logical. It has a job. It's going to do its job, and fuck
that's right.
anything that gets in the way of it doing that job. So
Yeah,
that's kind of what I was hearing here, and it's very interesting the similarities because I look back on the most recent incident where the robot showed up, and I look back at like something that happened long before I got herpes, maybe even to the first time that I can recall myself like switching this on. Like you called it a switch, almost like a kill switch for your emotions, right? And so
yeah,
this had been highlighted by your herpes diagnosis. It came in and it highlighted this issue of self worth, right?
yep,
And
absolutely.
that's just like an that's something that we can begin to recognize with help. Being heard and being listened to may not be the thing that points this out, but having a plan, going over it with someone who is able to speak to these things and support you, someone who has experience and education in this is able to help you recognize and then change the behavior. So my question to you is, with that having recognized that, did you go to therapy while you were still touring, or did you decide, nope, I'm done and now I'm going to therapy?
Yeah, it was at actually, you know what it was? I got so burnt out, right? Just like I couldn't care less about these kids at the end. I was like, go do what you want, you little snot nose little pieces of shit. Like I was so over it. Like, I had no compassion left for them. And um, we quit. I finished touring. I got home. I got a regular job. And I started to like operate more in obscurity, and I could hide the fact that I had this diagnosis, and not everybody needed to hear it all the time. And I got so depressed. I like dived down into this like deep pit of self pity because I'm like, I don't have a purpose anymore. And it was like at the point that I got really depressed that a really good friend of mine was just like, have you heard of therapy?
So at
And
this
I
point,
actually,
you had hit the bottom. You hit the compassion fatigue. You were just like,
yeah,
I'm depressed. And then it was a friend that made the suggestion.
yeah. And even then, I didn't listen for a good long time. It took, um, it's so funny. I started therapy because about five couples that my husband and I knew ended their marriages. It was like all within the same year, five couples all just were like, we're not together anymore.
Wait,
This
was
traumatic thing happened. I cheated. This person cheated. These ones cheated together. Like,
oh shit.
it was bonkers. And so my husband and I, we were like, okay, I knew that I needed to be in therapy. My friend had already said, like, this is maybe a good option for you. Um, yeah, like it was on the radar, but because in Christian circles, we just think that, like, pray about it. Just pray about it. It'll get better. Just pray about it. I'll pray for you. So for a long time, I just tried to solve it with like reading my Bible more and praying and whatever. But
Yeah.
though prayer is good and it works. It's good for you. Prayer is good and it's good for you. But when you need therapy, there's nothing that can replace therapy.
Yeah. So it
There's
sounds
no other
like
option.
it sounds like the higher power you believe in was using this language that you could understand, which is okay, here's your priority. Your priority is your relationship. I'm going to speak through the relationships around you,
Yeah.
and that'll be the language that you interpret to go and get the kind of help that you need.
And I see a lot of the time when I feel like, what I understand to be my higher power, like what I understand God to be, I understood Him inviting me. Um, that I use the language of invitation all the time. I feel like um, God invites me to things. God invites me to conversations. He invites me to change. He invites me, and I'm able and I have permission to say no and not take the invitation. So the first time that the invitation to therapy was offered, I declined. And then it took like all these couples falling apart, and then there was another invitation. Like, hey, maybe preemptively, you and JP should go and just talk about some things and just see what happens. And then we got into therapy and we started working through our stuff. And then very quickly, I was like, I need to come by myself because I have shit to work out. Like, it has nothing to do with him. This is all my stuff.
Yeah.
And though he can witness it, and though it is sometimes so helpful to have a witness to that, I needed to be by myself. So I started going to therapy alone, and I started working through and hearing my therapist say to me, you were re-traumatized every time a kid yelled at you. And I was like, oh, I guess. And she's like, no, you're not. You're like, just hear me say this. Every time you were heckled, that was re-traumatizing you. And that means something. And I was like, say more.
Yeah. You
you
know,
know, like, our friends don't have that language. Our
mm-mm.
friends don't have that education. Our friends don't have the tools to dole out or to dole out, treatment and to dole out plans for treatment and, ways to recognize you're in a cycle. And here's where, like, so you have this cycle. Here's where you enter back in. Like, you have a cycle that you're going through. It's a circle, round and round and round and round and round. And there's one moment that kicks you out of it, and you can observe the cycle. But
Yeah.
if you don't get kicked out of the cycle, then you just enter back in and you amp back up, and you could do that your whole life.
Hmm. Now, the way that I want to drop this in here just for people who may be faith driven or whose faith may be challenged right now,
Mm-hmm.
based on whatever it is that they have going on in their lives. But like we ask our higher power, we ask God, the universe, to give us a sign or do something for us. It doesn't look like the hand of God coming down and picking you up and placing you in a position somewhere. It's oftentimes a gentle whisper in the quietest moments of our lives. So that may be during
Yeah.
the suffering where we're just like, I can't take anymore. Now what? And then in that
Mm-hmm.
moment of silence, it's just like a whisper or a nudge in the right direction, because for you, you got invited on two different occasions through someone close to you to attend therapy. And then when you finally go, it's like, oh, this is what I've been missing. This is what I'm supposed to be shown. Because
Absolutely.
our relationship, so like I view God as like gift of the divine. Like that's my
Mm,
acronym for God. And so when we begin to explore our gifts, we kind of find our way back home to whatever, the core beliefs are. Like it's this scavenger hunt or the ultimate game of hide and go seek, reconnecting with whatever higher power you choose to or choose not to believe in. But
yeah.
that's what this sounds like to me. It was through your gift of connecting to your higher purpose, and speaking and educating. Like through that was where you started to get just pummeled in a way,
Yeah.
and you had to get beat down to the point where you were ready to listen. And then when you were ready to listen, you still didn't hear the message, and it had to come to you
Yeah.
a different way. So like for people who are looking for a sign, the sign's always there.
Oh my gosh, always. And that's the other thing too. Like the only the only time that you can um, the only time that you're able to notice the invitations that you're receiving, because they're being extended all the time, is when you sit quietly and in stillness. So as a profession now, I'm what is called a spiritual director, and it sounds crazy and it's a misnomer because I don't do very much directing. But my job now is to sit with people and to help them notice the invitations that are being offered to them. And one image that we use a lot in spiritual direction is the idea or the image of a jar, a glass jar full of river water, and it's full of like mud and sticks and rocks, and it's all been shaken up. And it's like when you are agitated, when you are constantly moving, when you are ignoring your body's clues, you're ignoring your heart's clues, you're just moving through, you're plowing through because you're hurt and you don't want to notice. And that's like a river water jar just like shaking up. And then you set it down on the desk and you sit and you watch it settle. And that's what your insides do when you sit in silence and solitude. And when all of it settles to the bottom, then you can see through the water and you can see what's there. And I think that so I was invited, I could feel like God inviting me into therapy. But then through therapy, I was invited into something else, which was a study in new monasticism. And then I was, invited into something else, which was the study of spiritual direction. And then I was invited, and it's just one after the other because we're always being offered invitations. We're being offered invitations to value ourselves. You have in every instance where you want to like make a joke about yourself or make light of a really hard thing, or you don't want this person to not like you, so you're gonna like, you know, um, just like undervalue who you are in that moment. These are all invitations to be like, you know what? No, I am a great person. I'm a valuable person. I'm a loving person. I have something to offer. And the invitation that I hear right now is to be myself because you called it, what did you call it? GOD. What's your acronym?
Oh, gift of divine.
Gift of Divine. So I have in my uh, practice, I guess, is the idea that every person has divinity within them, that there is an imprint of divinity within each person. And every time you choose to acknowledge that identity of divinity, you are being true to yourself, but also in doing so, you are being true to that other person because you're offering them something that you didn't have to offer. You didn't have to offer yourself. And being true to yourself is also an empowering thing for like the people around you.
Mm-hmm.
It's an invitation. Anyway, I could go on. This is like
So
we're getting into like my professional practice
when
now.
you getting back on stage?
When am I getting back on
Yeah,
stage?
when you gonna start talking about STIs to high school kids again?
Oh my gosh, I don't know if ever. I don't know. I'm a little irrelevant now. I don't know if you can see I have like lots of gray hair. Kids don't like you when you have gray hair.
Oh my goodness.
No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. I've been asked that a couple times. I was telling people that I And I was telling them, like, go listen to Courtney's podcast. Like, it's really cool. Like, even if you don't have a positive diagnosis for anything, this is just like good. Like,
Thank you.
everyone needs therapy. Everyone needs to understand how intrinsically valuable they are. Everybody needs to know um, these good things,
Yeah.
and they were like, oh my gosh, like, because a lot of these people knew me when I was speaking, and they've seen the change that I have, gone through.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the same. Like, I am softer. I'm a softer place now than I was before because therapy. Because I let um, trauma, and I let my experiences harden me and turn robot like that. Like, just turn it all off and be like, you can't hurt me. Like, laugh it up, you little butthead. Like, that kind of way of being, right? And I think that they were really excited. They were like, "Oh, this is so exciting! Like, you love speaking," and I'm like, "Do I?
Yeah.
I don't know if I do."
Uh,
But I don't
um,
know. I don't know when, if there's ever a time for that.
well, I mean, this was great. I am very much appreciative of you taking the time, especially to go into this particular topic with me because it's been on my heart to bring up. It's just never really been appropriate, the way that I have to articulate it versus having your experience. I think your experience fits perfectly alongside the narrative of what we're trying to do here and what we
Mm-hmm.
want to encourage people who are considering getting into this space to do, which is to take care of themselves first. Um,
Legit, because you cannot, like, we use the image of like a jar a lot. Just the idea that you can't pour out of an empty thing. Like, you have to put stuff back in your jar in order to pour out. To be serving other people, you have to serve yourself first, and it's just really important.
exactly. So we have about 5 minutes left, and what I wanted you to do, so like um, you did this little prayer for me, and it made me feel good. So perhaps this would be a good space if you have something in you that you would like to pray over the listener here who needs it.
Hmm. Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. Yeah, can I just pray?
Yeah, just for
Oh.
the person whose story may be similar to yours, or the person who just kind
Mm-hmm.
of needs a little kickstart to their faith, or the person who might need to just settle into that shaken mud water with sticks and
Mm-hmm.
mud all in it so that they can see the
Yeah.
message for them in the bottle.
That river water image is from Ruth Haley Barton. So if anybody wants to know, go find her. She's amazing. Ruth Haley Barton. Um, yeah, I'm gonna. You know what? I'm just gonna I'm gonna pray some things, and I'm just gonna let it out. I'm gonna get crazy over here. Holy Spirit, thank you for being with us. Thank you. Hopefully, uh, you are making welcome people who maybe are afraid to even acknowledge that you are with them. Spirit of welcome, I pray, Lord, that you would draw these people back to you, um, that they would understand that a diagnosis does not mean they can't follow the God they love, that positive HSV doesn't mean your life is ending, but it could be just beginning, and it could be the thing that makes you realize that you are worth more than what the world wants to believe about you. Um, so, Holy Spirit, I just pray that you would speak to your people, that you would comfort your people, that they would know that they are not alone, that their life is not over, and that there is healing and there is life on the other side. You say in a story in the Bible, um, you say to a prophet, sit, eat, and rest because the journey is too hard. And so this journey is hard and this journey is long. And I pray that people would sit and rest and eat and gain their strength to walk out this journey, to be brave and bold, to understand their intrinsic value, to live that out, and to just walk bravely in this world because this world needs you. We want to see you. We want to hear you. We are here for it. So I thank you for this opportunity. opportunity. I thank you for Courtney. Oh my gosh, all the amazing things that he is doing, all the amazing things he is going to do. I pray that you would bless him, that you would seal the work he's doing, and that you would just make your love so incredibly present within him and around him. Thank you. In the name of Jesus.
Thank you so much. That was shorter than I thought it was gonna be. I was like, I don't know how she gonna do it, but you managed to make it work. Um, so yeah, I appreciate you so much, Meg. Again, thank you for the story. Thank you for the beautiful prayer, and thank you for your presence and just for reaching out. Is there anything else that you want to leave us with before I let you go?
Your life's not over.
Can you say that quote again, just so I have it at the end here, because I want to
Which one?
the one about self worth, like you inherently have self worth.
Yeah. So you woke up this morning.
Can you
You
talk
opened your
louder?
eyes.
For some reason, you're not loud anymore.
How about now?
Nope.
Weird. Oh, is it gonna run out now?
No, we're good.
Nope. Okay.
It's just weird. I can't hear you as loud as I could before.
Oh, that's so strange.
Eh,
Now?
nope. Just yell.
Okay. So the fact that you woke up this morning, that you opened your eyes and you filled your lungs with air, means that you're valuable. You didn't do anything to earn it, so you can't do anything to lose it. It's just there. You're valuable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That concludes this episode of Something Positive for Positive People. Please like, rate, review, subscribe to, share this podcast with whoever you think may find it useful. If you want to support our efforts in expanding into more states to get people therapy who are struggling with their herpes diagnosis, you can donate at www.spfpp.org via Venmo, PayPal, or you can become a Patreon subscriber. And if you need other options, feel free to reach out to me directly at Courtney, Courtney, at spfpp.org. And that's just the acronym of something positive for positive people. If donating via money is a little bit much for you, then you can always just leave us a review for the podcast, or you can just share it with us, share it with someone, or you can suggest places for us to interview. Well, me, because it's just me. If you want to recommend like podcasts for me to be an interview guest on, or if you know people who may want to share their stories, they can write in, or we can set up a time and date the interview as well. So that's it from me. Till next time, stay sex positive.